Continuing our conversation of IT governance, let's talk about the components of an information security policy. When you look at the information security policy, remember how we talked earlier that the policy can be as simple as just a page with a few paragraphs, or it can be 100 pages and with all kinds of subparts. We saw that we can go to sans.org and we can download policy templates that we can use as sort of a framework to develop our own security policy. As an IS auditor, when I ask to see the IS security policy, I expect to see a definition of what the security is, what are the policy objectives and scope. I want to understand management's philosophy on security and their appetite for risk. I want to understand their role in incident reporting and what control framework they're actually using, what kinds of controls. I want to understand their whole organizational practice and process. I want to understand how they intend to educate, train, and continue to train employees, and how they intend to enforce their security plans, and how they intend to evaluate the plans, and also any additional resources and documentation. I want to see all of it. So different policy types. We know that the policy can have many subparts, and we saw that it could be anything from mobile to authentication to server to patch management. Here are some examples. There can be sort of the overall policy, how we classify data, what's considered acceptable use, like you're not allowed to use email for private purposes. Realize that the company could look at your email or anything you create on company property is not completely private. And there's some gray areas there, of course. Also, the end user and access control. So your policy is going to include these and many, many topics depending upon what's appropriate for your organization. For maintaining the policy, you can't just write a policy once and expect it to last forever. That policy should be reviewed every year if possible and updated, because threats will change and the nature of your business will change. So you should see if people are reviewing their policies on a regular basis. I want to see, when's the last time you reviewed this? When did you update it? Why did you update it? And let me just see, what is your requirement for reviewing and updating? What did you add? What did you delete or retire or phase out? And above all, I want to see you document these. So like this paragraph has now been superseded by that paragraph. And it's good to have an old and a new, or have the old one with the new one. The old one, you see it, the lines are struck out, and then you see the new paragraphs underneath it. So you can see right there the before and after. So these are different ways. I want to actually track the change control on this. So when we have standards, remember it all starts with a policy. The policy then may refer to standards, which remember are mandatory, they're required. Procedures are how do we actually implement this? And remember, of course, guidelines are suggested practices to help us implement our standards and our policy. Policy should acknowledge any regulatory or legislative issues. So like, do you fall underneath SOX, or do you fall underneath HIPAA, or what regulations do you fall underneath? And also, what is required by law for backup and recovery, for storage, acceptable levels of service? Are there any laws regarding confidentiality or service availability or privacy? Are there any corporate governance requirements? There's probably going to be something for most businesses. Certainly if you're financial or if you're health, you're for sure going to have lots of these. Also, business continuity and disaster recovery plan review and testing. I want to see, are there any legislative requirements for those as well? Here are some governance standards in the U.S. You are not required to memorize them, but you should know in general what they do. So here's Sarbanes-Oxley, also known as SARBOX or SOX. And the bottom line of this is that top management now is personally responsible for accuracy of financial information, and there are severe penalties for fraudulent financial activity. Then there's HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This guarantees that individuals' health information is properly protected. If you've been to a drugstore, a pharmacy at any time recently, you'll have seen HIPAA in action, where they actually have you stand back away from the customer that's being helped so that their privacy is a little bit more assured. Or if you've had to sign a logbook. And here's where we assure that individual health information is properly protected, and all the while still allowing the flow of information that's needed to provide and promote high-quality health care and protect the public health as well as the individual health. Then there's something called GLBA, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. This is basically allows now commercial banks, investment banks, security firms, insurance companies, they're actually now allowed to consolidate. And it's no longer considered a monopoly in some cases. Here's FISMA. And FISMA, it recognizes that the importance of information security to the economic and national security interests of the United States, and it basically says that all federal agencies must develop an IS security plan, an information security plan, agency-wide, and implement it. Here's something called COSO, Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadway Commission. It's basically 5 private sector organizations, and they established a common internal control model for companies and organizations to assess their own control systems. Here is NIST SP 800 series, and this is just a way of formalizing publications of documents that are of interest to the computer security community. And so they started this so that there would be an actual separate identity for publications, NIST publications, specifically for IT security. And they also report on, they've got their own lab, the Information Technology Lab, the research of that lab, the guidelines, and the outreach efforts to collaborate activities with the industry and the government and academic organizations. So when you are evaluating IT policies, standards, and procedures for compliance, you need to know what standards and regulations actually apply to this business. You need to know that. You need to review each policy to determine if it supports the standards and the business objectives. You need to determine if the policies that apply to third parties and outsourcers and vendors are also in compliance with the enterprise policies. You need to document and report which policies don't comply with the enterprise objectives. And you need to review IT procedures to make sure they fulfill all the necessary control objectives, and they, of course, support all of the relevant IT policies.